remember my soul or my essence, my spirit popping out of my body like toast out of a toaster. And it was very, very dramatic. I can't speak to that enough. It was like almost on the cusp of being on a roller coaster ride that 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 goes right up to terrifying you. But it's not terrifying. It's exhilarating. It's fun. It's like, wow. And that's what I experienced. And I popped out of my body and very dramatically I started floating away from it. And a lot of people say, "Well, did you see your body?" I did not. I was floating away in this perfect, velvety, comforting, peace-filled blackness. It was like the blackness had wrapped its arms around me and was just comforting me. I mean, you don't think of comfort from blackness. And I remember thinking in this blackness, I remember thinking, I'm pretty terrified of the dark, even more so since my husband's suicide. And yet, I'm not only am I not afraid, I'm the most peaceful I've ever been.
I'm here today with Rosemary Thornton. Rose was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer, and during a related minor medical procedure, she bled to death and had no heartbeat for more than 10 minutes. As a result, she had a near death experience and is here to share that with us today. Rosemary, thank you so much for being my guest. I'm very honored and blessed to have you today.
Thank you.
So tell me what happened. You were diagnosed with cancer and then had to have a procedure, and then this wild thing happened to you that you were not expecting. Take me back.
Wild is the right word, and not expecting is also the right word. You know, it's interesting throughout my life, I had been fascinated by stories of near death experiences, and I mean fascinated. From Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, little trade paperback, I think came out in 76. I read it again and again and again. And then George Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow, and Betty Eadie, and Dannion Brinkley, and I just couldn't get enough of them. So I read them repeatedly because I don't know, I love the stories, I just love them. And the other interesting aside is at age 11, I had such a profound understanding that this earth was like this base camp, and I felt so much like I didn't belong here at age 11. I just wanted out, and I thought to myself, "What's the best way out?" I thought, "Well, you gotta shut this thing down." And I thought about ways to do it, and I told myself, "Well, I think if I go away, my mom will be really sad." So, but it is astonishing to me that so early on in life, I knew I was, as the world might say, an oddball, a half bubble off plum, very different from everybody else. My father used to teach me this game where he wanted me to learn how to communicate without words. And I learned later there was a Twilight Zone like this. Some guy took his kid and tried to teach her how to communicate telepathically. Well, he did this because he was always interested in the occult and paranormal and all that stuff. Well, when my mother found out about it, she put a stop to it. But I guess what I'm saying is from a very early age, I've known that I'm different and I feel and experience things that are not typical perhaps to the human experience. But yeah, in September of 2018, I had a minor surgical procedure due to being diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. It was a gynecological cancer. And after the procedure, they uh, they woke me up in recovery and they said, "Time to go home." And I said, "Okay." And I told them repeatedly, because, they get you up and move you around and stuff. And I told them repeatedly, something's gone very wrong. I'm bleeding way too much. And they said, "No, no, no. Once you get home, you'll be fine." 3 times I told them that 3 times. They were very dismissive and just told me to go home and lay down. They said, they said, "Once you're in your own bed, you'll feel better." And I was like, I don't think that's going to fix this. But anyway, I did as I was told. I went home and at home, things just got worse. And I stepped into my shower because I was bleeding so profusely, and, when you're bleeding to death, you really don't wanna make a mess on the carpet, housekeeping is paramount. So I was that's why I stepped into the shower, so at least I wouldn't mess up the house. I had really pretty carpet, that was good carpet, and from there, I realized I had to make a decision, and I had been pretty unhappy with my life. 29 months prior, my husband had ended his life at our home, and I had been extremely unhappy about that's a great gross understatement. I had been miserable, completely miserable. I lost my mind after he took his life. So in that shower, I thought, I've been praying every day that God would let me go. Just let me slip out of here. And I thought, now I'm bleeding to death in a shower in my own home. This is my way out. And I even thought about the Bible verse. I think it's 1 Corinthians 10:13 that said, God will show you a way out. I lived with that. I lived with it in the 29 months between my husband's suicide and my own near death experience. And standing in that shower, watching this blood come out of me, I thought, this is my way out. And it won't be my fault. And my children won't have guilt. And my friends will just be sad. But I also thought about all the people who had rushed into the fray to save me, spent 29 months holding me up, propping me up, letting me live in their home, feeding me, caring for me as much as if I was their own beloved child. And I thought I kind of owe it to them to not die in this shower. So off to another hospital I went, and this is only, I had only been home maybe 30 minutes, if that. So went to another ER. They made some more mistakes, kind of greased the skids to the afterlife for me. They gave me some morphine, which was a mistake. I used to give this talk to occasionally to live audiences. And when I did, I tell them, yeah, I was bleeding to death and they gave me morphine. And you can tell the medical personnel in the audience because they all go, oh. But they did. But before I lost consciousness from that morphine, this beautiful older nurse, and by beautiful, I mean spiritually beautiful, she had kind eyes. She held my hand and I asked her, I said, promise me you're not going to let me die. This is my second hospital of the day and I'm bleeding out. And she held my hand and she said, oh, honey, we're not going to let you die. We have many solutions for this. And more than saying it, you could look in her eyes and tell she meant that. She was not going to lose me. So I was grateful to hear that. Um, and then I lost consciousness. Meanwhile, uh, my friend who had accompanied me to the hospital said he was standing by my bedside and I was no longer conscious. And he said he looked at the blood pressure cuff and the monitor, and the numbers kept going down, down, down. And he said it hit 32 over 25, which is pretty much gone. And he said he realized I was on the cusp of death. And just as he stood up to go get somebody, he said, Rose, your eyes popped open. And he said, and you tried to sit up on this gurney because I'm in a little ER room, very small room. And he said, you couldn't quite sit up, so you reached your hands up to heaven. And then you wiggled your fingers, almost like a child reaching to be picked up by a parent. And he said, you said something that could not be heard. And he said, and then your hands flopped down to your side. And he said, you relaxed. And then the blood pressure cuff went to error, which means it was less than 32 over 25. And that set off an alarm at I don't know where, I guess it just set off an audible alarm. And a nurse came in the room. And my friend, I'm so grateful my friend was there to witness this. He had been seated beside the gurney. He said the first thing the nurse did, was go over to the blood pressure machine. It was one of those things that's, blue box mounted on a IV thing. And he said she checked the plug in the wall, like, this thing's quit working. And he said the next thing she did was she took her knuckles, and they call it a sternal rub, where they take their knuckles and rake them across your sternum, because I'm told it elicits a pain response. And even an unconscious person is going to, bristle or their eyes will twitch or something. And he said, not only did you not respond at all, he said, but you were an unbelievably unnatural shade of white. He said, I didn't think human flesh could be that white. And so they called for the doctor. The nurse summoned the doctor immediately, and then he was shooed out. And he said he wasn't out in the hallway more than a few seconds when the crash cart went flying down the hallway, just like you see in the medical dramas, and around the door and into the room. And uh, he was out there for some time. But meanwhile, I was having the time of my life. I do remember losing consciousness. I can't say that. I remember just kind of feeling, oh, relaxed. I can't say I remember passing out, but I remember just when that morphine hit, I was like, oh, that feels good. And then the next thing I remember, and boy, this was very dramatic. I remember my soul or my essence, my spirit popping out of my body like toast out of a toaster. And it was very, very dramatic. I can't speak to that enough. It was like almost on the cusp of being on a roller coaster ride that 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 goes right up to terrifying you. But it's not terrifying. It's exhilarating. It's fun. It's like, wow. And that's what I experienced. And I popped out of my body and very dramatically I started floating away from it. And a lot of people say, "Well, did you see your body?" I did not. I was floating away in this perfect, velvety, comforting, peace-filled blackness. It was like the blackness had wrapped its arms around me and was just comforting me. I mean, you don't think of comfort from blackness. And I remember thinking in this blackness, I remember thinking, I'm pretty terrified of the dark, even more so since my husband's suicide. And yet, I'm not only am I not afraid, I'm the most peaceful I've ever been. So I floated away from the body, and it wasn't very long at all. And I remember thinking, I remember just feeling so relieved that it was over. And one of my first thoughts was, my heart has stopped. And I thought, huh, isn't that interesting? How do I know that? And I thought, I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And my next thought was, you're dying. And then being a long term writer and editor, I said, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. And it cracked me up because here I am going to my reward, dancing off this mortal coil, and I'm still being a little bit silly. And the thing that was so cool about this is I was speaking out loud. I was speaking just as I am now. And I heard myself talk just as much as I hear it now. My first vocation was in broadcasting. So I was well familiar with the sound of my own voice, but I was producing sound and hearing sound. And I thought, the traditional accoutrements by which human beings make and hear sound, they're on that gurney back there. And I thought, not only am I making sound, but I sound like I've always sounded. And I still have my goofy giggle. That was actually very, very comforting because when I said, actually, you're not dying, you're dead, I laughed out loud. And I thought, this is great. I don't have breath sounds. Pretty sure I don't have vocal cords. And yet everything I am went with me. My intellect, my fascination about this new experience, everything, my voice, my macabre sense of humor. And I thought to myself, what exactly did I leave on that gurney back there? And I thought, the regret, the guilt, the woe, the sadness, the anxiety, the self recrimination, self hatred. I had quite a bit of that. All of that got left behind on that gurney. And I thought to myself, I've always wondered what I would look like without those anxieties and fears and self doubts and the rest of it. And I thought, I like it. I like this person I am without all that stuff. And it was very comforting and there were so many things that happened. I was dead as the world measures such things for more than 10 minutes. And yet, if you asked me how long I was gone, I would have said hours, days. I mean, there is no sense of time. Have you heard of the Grayson scale by which they measure the depth of a near death experience?
I've heard of
It's
it.
named after Bruce yeah, named after Bruce Grayson, who's done so much research. But that's one of their questions was, did it feel like you were gone longer than you were really gone? So I think that's a very common experience. But early on, again, it seems like if you laid this out chronologically, which you can't really do, but if you tried, I felt this massive spiritual being join me. And I mean massive. And this being was behind me, slightly behind me, to my left, and much taller than me. And I'm still in this blackness and floating, so I can't really see much. And yet, instinctively, I turn to my left and I look up and I say, literally with a lilt in my voice, I say, and who are you? And the answer was immediate. Before I could even finish that very short sentence, the answer was, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. I thought, wow, that's Genesis 1:25 and 26, made in the image and likeness of God. And I thought my whole life I've really strived to understand what that means to be made in the image and likeness of God, of the Creator. And I thought, huh, because it didn't just come with the words, it came with an understanding of what it meant, that there's an original. And I remember thinking, okay, it would have been good to know, 59 years, these 59 years I had in this experience, but okay, good to know now. What's next? And this floating in the blackness really did just go on and on. In this experience, I had the company, I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. I had the company of what you might call angels or spiritual beings or spiritual guides, but they were very much with me. And one of the thoughts I had, I thought about the Bible verse, the peace that passeth all understanding shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And I thought, this is the peace that Paul spoke about. It's a peace you can't understand because it exceeds anything we could describe with words. And that's the peace I was experiencing. I know a lot of people talk about love, and not to diminish that, but as a very neurotic, anxiety prone person, it was the peace that I wanted and craved. And now I had it. And one of the things that was told to me, because I remember asking as I floated in this blackness, I said, I've been here before. Like in this 59-year experience, this is very familiar to me. What's going on here? And again, before I could even ask the full question, the answer was immediate. As an infant, I became extremely ill, and before I ever left the hospital, and my mother was told one night, this baby is passing on now. We're not going to let you sit here in this nursery and watch this baby die. Go home. She doesn't have but an hour or two. She'll be gone before the sun rises. So they chased my mom out of the hospital. And I realize now I was left with a nun, probably. It was a Catholic hospital. But I was told, you didn't come close to death that night. You did cross over, and we sent you back. And that's why this feels so familiar to you. And my mother had told me this story, and the rest of the story is she told. She didn't tell me till I was in my 30s, and my kids were bigger. But she told me this story, and she said they made me leave the hospital, and they said go home and focus on your sons. This one's gone. And I had blood poisoning, and it had shut my kidneys and other organs had started to shut down when the doctors made this pronouncement. So my mother only told me this story once because it was so painful for her. But she said she went home, called a friend, and they prayed. They spent the night up praying. And she said the next morning she went in because no news is good news. You haven't gotten a call in the middle of the night from the hospital. That's good news. She went in, rushed to the nursery in the hospital. And she said the nun handed me to her and said, your baby isn't better. She's healed. She's perfect. So that explains so much about my life. I always knew I didn't belong here. I always knew I was a misfit. Somebody sent me a picture. I think it's from a Christmas movie. It's about the misfit toys, the group of misfit toys. I'm like, that's me. I'm the I'm the little girl. I've always felt like such a misfit. And the thing about being in this experience was uh if I had to sum all of it up in three words, it would be very simply the angels that embraced me as I returned. It was as though they said, welcome home, dearie. That was a hard one. That was tough, but you did it. You did it, and you're here with us now. And I wish I could tell everyone who's lost a child or spouse, anyone who's lost somebody really, really close to him, close to themselves, that that's what they're greeted with is, yeah, that was tough, but you're home now and it's okay. And look at you. You did a good job. And I just, even thinking about that, it's so sometimes when I get really stressed out, I just think about that there's going to be that day again where I'm surrounded by those beings who say, welcome home, dearie. Here you are. Look at you. We're so glad to see you. So in this blackness, this went on, and a lot of stuff happened. And that's why I wrote a book about it, because it's way too much to put into a short podcast. But the next thing that happened was I was standing on my own 2 feet in a white room, which is a little puzzling because I was floating in that blackness and then I was in the white room and I don't remember the transition. I've always assumed, I mean, this happened 6 years ago now, 5.5, I guess, 6. I always assumed that, it was a little amnesia thing. That maybe I saw people, I don't know, but I know there was a chunk of memory missing. And a very dear friend, very spiritually minded friend said, she said, what if it wasn't a matter of amnesia? What if it was a facet of something so incredible happened that your human mind, or see, I didn't have a human mind, but whatever human construct we have back here cannot frame what happened between the floating and the being in the white room. So I don't know. But in this white room, I saw this door in front of me, and it was about 15 feet in front of me. And I was like, hey, I've read those books. I know what that door is. That door is where we are. Cross the Rubicon, man. There is no turning back once we get to that door. I was so excited about that door. I mean, like really excited. Throughout this whole thing, my whole life, I've kept a gratitude list of 5 things for which I'm grateful, which is a good habit. I think that's a good habit. And but throughout this whole experience of the floating and all of it, I was like, I'm so grateful. It's over. I'm so grateful. This is great. My funny little giggles come with me, my intellect, my fascination about my environment, all of it, everything I really am is with me. And oh, it's just so great. But yeah, I kept saying, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. It's really cool. And, prior to this, just backing up very briefly, I had 3 prayers that I prayed pretty much every day or when I thought about it. Between my husband's suicide and my own death, I prayed, God, heal me or let me go. I knew I couldn't last long in this miserable state. And secondly, I asked God, this won't be long. I know. When I die, spare me the life review. I don't want to see the horrors of what I've been through or how I reacted. I mean, I lost my mind. I did not behave in ways that normal people react. I was not well behaved. I did stupid things. I became addicted to prescription painkillers. I really got screwed up. And then third prayer was I couldn't handle any more big decisions. That was huge. There were a lot of decisions to make when these kind of things happen. Couldn't manage them anymore. So floating, or not floating, but on my own 2 feet in this white room. And by the way, I didn't know that I had feet or legs. I don't know why I didn't have the presence of thought to consider that. But I saw that door and I thought, I don't know if I got legs or feet or the mechanism by which I move, but I know I can perambulate with intention and get to that door. And I thought, okay, that's my intention. Get to that door as fast as possible. And I did. The sense of it as I walked, but who knows? So as I'm moving through this white mist, it was like a mist or a fog in the room. It's not just falling gently on me, and it was like a pea soup fog. It was very thick, but it was actively like dancing around me. And I thought, whoa, this is really neat. And I asked the angelic being that was with me, I said, I feel like I ought to be able to focus on one of these droplets. Next time you're in a fog, think about focusing on a piece of fog. But the angel that was with me said, your spiritual eyes have not acclimated to this new environment. But these are not droplets of vapor. These are particles of light, and you're being cleansed. You're being prepared to go into heaven. And as it was explained to me, this is like a spiritual car wash. All the muck and filth of the earth has to be cleansed. And I was told that some people die with disease process or mental illness or some physical limitation so heavily imprinted on consciousness, they think it's part of them. They think it's part of their identity. By the way, the word personality comes from the Latin word for mask. Pretty interesting. So I was told these droplets, or the particles of light, were cleansing me and were stripping all this stuff away. And the other thing that happened in this white room as I moved through it, it was explained to me that if I decided to go back, that I would be restored to wholeness. And it didn't say we're going to heal this thing or that thing. It was just you will be restored to wholeness. Okay, good to know. Not relevant, but whatever. So I got to that door and I paused at the door and I put my right hand up to push through it. It was closed. That annoyed me. Put my right hand up to push through it. Pretty fascinated by the fact that I used my right hand. Right-handed on earth, right-handed in heaven. Pretty cool. But I paused. I did take a moment and I asked the angels, is this the divine will for my life? And again, I couldn't even get out, is this the divine? And the answer was immediate. And the answer was no. This is not the divine will for your life. But whatever you decide, whether you decide to go forward or to go back to that human experience, you go with all of God's love and mercy and grace and care and tenderness. Let's see, it's grace, mercy, love, and care. I think we're all of them. And I thought, okay, I'll take that deal. I'm doing the door. But then And that was my decision, actually, was to go through the door because I was 59. You know, when you die at 59, especially during a botched surgery, nobody says, "Oh, but she was so young." That ship had sailed. So instantly, I had this vision of this nurse who had shown me such tenderness and motherliness. And in this vision, she was sitting in a little hospital supply room, sitting on a metal stool, head in her hands, leaning forward and sobbing uncontrollably. And it was more than a vision. It was almost as though I was an invisible observer to the experience in the room. She couldn't hear me, see me, or know I was present, but I was in that room with her, watching her sob. And she said through tears, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die, and I've lost her. And I was like, oh, come on. She's a nurse. She's my age. She'll get over it. She's lost people before. And I was ready to go through the door. And then I didn't just hear the words, I felt her angst and her grief, that deep grief and guilt and remorse and sadness and pain. I felt it right in the center of my being. And I realized it was the same grief I had known after my husband's suicide. My husband and I had had an unpleasant conversation before he did the thing he did. And I had so much guilt, unspeakable. So I thought to myself, if I can spare one person that much pain, I have to go back. And in a millisecond, I mean less than a millisecond, I was back on that gurney. There was no backward swoosh. There was no tunnel. There was, none of that. I was back on that gurney. And I remember opening my eyes on the gurney and I saw an angel in the upper left hand corner of the room. And by angel, I mean just this being of light and not even in human form, just like this whirling ball of white energy, of white light. And I looked at her and I said, and my sense was her, but I looked at her and I'm still like, what just happened? And I said, hey, you know how much energy it took to die and then to get yanked back from that? And I said, that's a little like, actually what I thought was Robert's Rules of Order. We have a first, we have a second, and then we vote on it. We never even got to the discussion phase after the first, or I guess it's after the second you have discussion. But the angel just looked back at me and literally said, hi there. They're not real good at answering the questions of which you demand of them. And then the other thing that happened, as soon as I was conscious, the nurse, I don't know, I think it was the same nurse, but she was like nose to nose with me. And she said, what is your name? And I said, Rosemary. What year is it? And I said, 2018. And she said, where are you? And I said, a crummy excuse for an ER. Because I know after that much time, interesting thing about bleeding to death, which is what had happened to me. The interesting thing about bleeding to death is they can't do CPR because it just pushes more blood out of your body. So I interviewed a couple medical personnel. I interviewed an ER doctor, and he said they plug the tank, they plug the leak, refill the tank, and then start the heart. So, deciding whether or not to bring me back, I mean, it's the age old question, how long do they keep trying to resuscitate somebody before they're compromised? So I was then transported by ambulance to a major hospital in the area. And the funny thing is, as I was being loaded into that ambulance, because I'm like, hey, this is going to be a fun ride. I remember this so clearly as I'm being loaded. They have the gurney and they lift it up to get you into the back of the ambulance there. I remember so clearly thinking my entire life, I have read every book I could get my hands on about NDEs. And my experience was so different from all of them. And then I just had this knowing that they're tailor made. They're specifically tailor made. And my prayers had been answered. No life review, heal me or let me go, no life review. And thirdly, I can't handle any more decisions. So I was given a choice. It's a pretty big decision about whether to go on to heaven or come back to this experience. And I was given a choice and I was helped with the decision. I was given some very specific help. So in the hospital, the next morning, the doctor came in and he said, you had a heart attack last night. And I said, not me. I eat my fruits and veggies. I bike. I'm a cyclist, blah, blah, blah. He said, "No, no, you had a heart attack. They check your enzymes," and my enzymes indicated there had indeed been a heart attack. And he said, "We're going to take you in for some tests to see how much damage there is to the heart muscle." And he said, "There's some. We just don't know how much yet." And I said, "Oh, don't worry about the test. Angel said if I decided to come back, I'd be fine, fine, fine." And so they took me anyway. And the next morning, the doctor comes. I was in the hospital for 4 days. The next morning, doctor comes back to my bedside and he says, "Well, there's no damage to your heart muscle. You're a very lucky woman." I was like, I know what that's about. And the other thing, there's a lot of layers to the story, but one of the remarkable things that happened is when my human helpers, my friends, had to leave the hospital room, which is always good when you're kind of in a marginal state to have friends near you in case you get wheeled off for a kidney transplant or something. But my friends had come to be with me, and when they left the room, like to go to a cafeteria or, something like that, angels appeared at my bedside and sang me the most beautiful songs you could ever imagine. And they were very tall and they did have a humanesque form. And they were made of like light, and their gowns were like draped in light, made of light. And it was like there was beads, like the old back in the 70s when somebody, I don't know why we did this, but they would put these beads on doors, and there was beads strung together by all these long strings. And it was like they were draped in these beads on strings, but it was all bursting with light. And their songs glorified God, glorified the Creator. And the more they sang, the brighter they became. And the brighter they came, the more they sang. And it was absolutely overwhelming. I've often likened it to putting 100,000 amps through a 60 amp breaker box. It was almost too much for me to take in. And I sobbed. I cried a lot. And I said, "Don't stop, but this is a lot." And I said, "I'm really good at architecture and memorizing houses and designs and stuff. I have a good photographic memory for that." I said, "But I don't think I'm going to be able to remember these lyrics and the melody." And they said, "This is not for you to remember. This is for your healing. This is for your peace. This is your joy." They said, "This is a thank you for agreeing to come back." And they said, "We know that life on earth is hard. We know that was a hard decision to come back to this place. So this is our thank you." And I used to say that I would remember that the rest of my life, and that's not true. I will remember that for the rest of eternity. And it was so, so beautiful. And I remember, I mean, I had bled to death. That's what was my cause of death. And I remember I had some funny feeling around my abdominal area and lower. And I asked the angels, I said, "Am I going to die again? Because something's obviously not right yet. I feel weird inside." And the angels were very clear. They said, "No, we're still doing some things. We're still doing some restoration." And they said, "You're not going to die again for another 20 years," which I was both miffed and a little happy because it makes financial planning a lot easier. And then I had to go to another doctor after I got out of the hospital. I didn't want to leave the hospital. Do you know if you're lying in a hospital bed, they bring you food not only 3 times a day, but they bring you morning snack and evening snack, or morning snack, afternoon snack, and sometimes even an evening snack. They bring you food. And then they say, "What would you like? Would you like something else? Would you like some applesauce? Would you like a cookie? Would you like something to drink?" Oh man, did they push the drinks. They would just come in every 20 minutes and say, "Okay, you need to drink this." Because, I was a little low on fluids at that point. So it was fantastic. And I didn't want to leave the hospital. And the doctor came one morning, sat at my bedside, and said, "Miss Thornton, we're going to discharge you today." And I said, "I don't want to leave. They're really nice to me here. They're beautiful. They're loving. Everyone's great here." And he said, "No, they were going to discharge me to a nurse, what do you call it, a convalescent care facility, because I still need around the clock care for a while. But I had friends that were able to help." But he said, "No, your white blood cell count's pretty much nothing. And your red blood cell count ain't much better." And he said, "The risk of you bleeding to death is small." He said, "But the risk of you contracting a hospital-borne infection is not small." And he said, "If you get, MRSA or staph," he said, "we won't be able to save you." So I was like, "Oh." So I went home, and there, more incredible things happened. I was going to say, I had to find another doctor. A lot of really cool things happened. I had a friend praying for me throughout this experience. And I called him and I said, George, they're telling me that my blood count's so messed up, it's going to be easy 2 to 3 months before I can stand up without fainting and walk without being breathless. And that my white blood cell count will take 2 to 3 months because apparently it's the bone marrow produces this stuff. And George said, huh, we'll see about that. And it was, I think it was 12 days later, they did a blood test, outpatient blood test. And the doctor looked at it and said, oh, they messed up your blood work. And I said, what's wrong? And they said, your numbers are textbook perfect. That's impossible. I said, it's not. I said, the breathlessness is gone. I'm back riding my bike again. They said, what? I said, yeah, I feel pretty good. And then I had to find a different doctor, the original oncologist who had made the diagnosis. I went to a gynecologist for a problem and they said, you've got cancer. So they referred me to an oncologist, gynecological oncologist. But I went back to that one. He's the one who done the surgery on me. I went back to that one. I said, good news. I was healed in heaven. We don't have to worry about this cancer business anymore. And they do these patient portal things where you can look up your own chart. He put me down as mentally ill. So that was his reaction. So he said, you have to start the chemo as soon as possible. We caught this early. We're gonna have to start the chemo. It was daily radiation, 5 days a week, and once a week chemo. So I went to another doctor. It took me a while to find another doctor because most of them were like, that oncologist you had is actually a nationally known expert. We're not going up against him. So I went to a smaller doctor in a small town, 50 miles away from my house, some distance from my house. And she did a lot of tests and it was really so affirming and comforting too. But every test she did, PET scans, MRIs, all that business, she said, Rosemary, I don't see anything. She said, if you have cancer, it's stage 1, but let's do another surgical biopsy. So another biopsy was done and she woke me up in recovery and literally shook me awake after the surgery. And she had taken a lot of flesh from a lot of places internally because I had, several little slices and dices on me. And she said, not only, well, what she said is, there's no cancer. You were right. There's nothing there, nothing. Because she had two people in the surgical suite with her doing the biopsies at the same time. Plus, she sent samples off. So there was no cancer, which was wonderful. But then what I thought was really cool, my friend was again in the waiting room waiting to hear the results of this second surgery. And he said she ran out to him, threw her arms around his neck, and said, through tears, she's right. There's no cancer present. She said, not only did we not find one cancer cell, but her flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect. She said, I wouldn't believe she ever had cancer had I not seen the test from the original doctor. So that was good news. But the very important thing to me is that it wasn't just the healing of the physical ailment, which is huge, but I felt like there's a verse in the Bible that I opened to the first day I was home and opened my Bible, and it said, He restoreth my soul. And it felt like that was highlighted. That was the real healing. I finally forgave myself for my husband's suicide. What the angels told me was so powerful. They said, we are to work out our own salvation. You've been trying to work out his. That's his thing to work out. He's getting that worked out now. But start working on you and stop worrying about him. The other thing they said, you keep asking the same questions and they're unanswerable. Why did he do this? I thought he loved me. Why did he do this? I thought he loved me. And in this Deuteronomy 2:3, ye have circled the mountain long enough, time to stop and go north. And I thought, yeah. And what they said is stop saying, I thought he loved me, and instead replace it with, I loved. Because when we love, we're increasing our own light that we give to the world. And they said, focus on that you loved, and that's a lot. And stop asking these unanswerable questions. And I just felt this massive amount of forgiveness. I probably did do things wrong as a wife. I probably could have done things a lot better. But who hasn't? And I was able to forgive myself and It took some time actually for that to really sink into the level of my soul. But the PS to this is I had just purchased a shiny new red car and I sold my car. I sold a lot of my earthly belongings, sold most of my furniture, sold my house. I listed it at 2, it sold at 5 that afternoon, and this was 5.5 years ago. And I put my stuff in my little red Prius. It's a Prius C actually, and I drove 1,000 miles due west. I wanted to live. I had a family member in the Midwest that had lost his wife earlier, and I just wanted to live out in the Midwest and watch the corn grow. And people laugh at that, but I still have this innate hunger for watching things grow. That's when I get stressed out, and I still get pretty stressed out too often. I just go sit by a field, and there's a lot of corn in the Midwest and soybeans and other things. But when the wind comes across these expansive fields, you can just watch those things sway. And I just find so much peace in that. I love watching things grow. I mean, I love watching grass grow. It's not a joke. People make fun of me and laugh at me, but I can't get enough of flowers and I can't get enough of watching things grow. And I realized one day when I was thinking about it, I had been given up. My husband was a successful professional and I was a successful writer, kind of, sort of, maybe, this much of fame. And afterwards, those people in our impressive power circles, the fancy folks, just walked away from me. And who rushed in to save me was what the world might call, the not fancy folks. And and seeing those, they gave up on me. When you see a little itty bitty seed and they can't just drop it in the dirt, but they stomp it down, I felt like that was me. Lots of people just decided she's buried too deep in the ground in misery to ever come back. So I don't know the reason, but I sure do love watching things grow. I mean, like, it's what gives me peace. And I bought a house. I live with a partner, and I bought a house on the edge of a cornfield. And people say, well, it's kind of a modest house there. And I say, isn't it perfect? And I can look out my window and watch things grow. It is perfect.
Rosemary, you are amazing and you are such a bright and bubbly soul. You're so beautiful inside and out. I can't even imagine all the trauma that you've had to go through. And now look at you. Your experience must have been tremendous. Were you able to bring some of those feelings back with you, the overwhelming love and peace?
Some of it, as I was telling you before we started, I do a lot of podcasts and people get this idea because I get a lot of email. I do love the emails. I read every one. I always take a moment to try to send them a silent blessing and thank them for their email. But I do love receiving them. But people get this idea that I'm some ascended master, and that is so not true. you know, when I sit in church sometimes and I think, did that lady really need to open that perfume bottle and just pour it on her head because she smells way too intense? Or I think, my gosh, will those children ever stop screaming? And I mean, I have a lot of thoughts that are a lot less than perfect peace, but I try to replace them with better thoughts. When I find myself getting into that judgmental thing that, we all tend to do, or certainly I do, I stop and think about how much God loves them. Because one of the things I learned in my experience, something I was told, is that God really likes me. And that's true for all of us. We know God loves us, yes, but God looks at you and goes, I really like you. So I try to think about that for others. I wish I had this heightened, constant, sustainable, perfect peace, but nah. I try. Ain't happening yet.
Well, that's very comforting to know that God doesn't just love us, but He likes us. What was it like after you came back? Were you did you miss the other side? Were you feeling regretful?
Yes. Yes. I have a real dear friend. Her name is Ellen Dye, and she had a profound NDE, gosh, I think in the 80s. And it's so wonderful to have somebody like that you can call and say, "Hey, I'm depressed. What's up with this?" Or when I go to a funeral and I see the guy laid out in the casket, I'm like, "I'm envious of him. That doesn't seem like a normal emotion." And she goes, "Oh my gosh, I've never been to a funeral without thinking, lucky guy." But yeah, I suffered with a little bit of depression just because I'm like, I don't feel like I really came back for any big grand purpose. I didn't come back and patent something miraculous. I just kind of came back and I don't know. Mother Teresa said most of us can't do great big things, but we can do little things with big love, with great love. So I try to focus on that. And I was very hesitant to write a book. In fact, I decided not to because people can be very harsh in their judgments. I mean, I've heard it all. My favorite, oh, there's so many of them. You wrote a book to make money. I'm like, yeah, say that to every writer you ever met, Right. I'm rolling in the dough now because I wrote that book. No. And the other thing is they say, oh, you're just doing this for the money. And I say, well, why didn't I have, or the other one that people say is you're making it all up. I'm like, okay, if I was going to make this up, I'd do the tunnels and the sounds and the wildflowers. I wouldn't do this floating in blackness and going to a white room. And I had never even heard of the white room thing. But after my book came out, I started meeting hundreds of people like, online. And I've gotten, I don't know, 8,000 emails, a lot of emails. People talk about the white room. I've heard so many people say, one, I didn't tell anybody about my NDE, which I'm thinking might be kind of smart. But the other thing I hear is I had a white room too. I can't tell you how many people I've met that were taken into this white room with a light fog falling. So this is very common, and I'm learning now. But to be the first, not the first, I'm sure there's others out there, but it was just reaffirming to hear that other people have a similar experience. But yeah, I did not do this for the money. And if I was going to write an NDE book, it'd be like the really good ones, it'd be really cool. I really, the tunnel, the whoosh, the dead relatives, all that. Yeah, I would have gone all in for that.
I think yours is really good. Um, Very interesting. And you say that you didn't come back for this, big purpose, but I also think this is a big purpose for you to share your experience, to share not only your near death experience, but what happened previously and how you've miraculously healed from grief, from physical ailments, all of these things. That is a huge purpose. And you don't know how many people you help. It was stories like yours can change someone's life. So I think there's a very big purpose.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate that. And I guess one of the things that is a little vexing for me, right after this happened, because my books on architecture got me on PBS History Detectives, Sunday Morning News. I mean, I had a good run. A&E's biography. My book was even featured on Jeopardy one year. I mean, one season, one episode. How cool is that? But after this, all the people interested in the Rosemary who wrote those books, they just went goodbye. But the people who rushed in to save me, I feel like I always wanted to say to them, don't bother. I'm a lost cause. Just let me go. I'm going to be dead soon because I stopped eating. I just stopped eating. I lost 35 pounds like that because I wasn't eating anymore. And I was like, I can just wither away to nothing. But they insisted on saving me. So one of my friends, oh my gosh, her name was Tracy. She took me into her home for 4 months. 4 months. She had crazy Rosemary who woke up in the middle of the night screaming at the top of her lungs, living in her house. And Tracy would tell me over and over and over and over and over and over again, she would say, there is nothing you could have done to make him end his life. And there is nothing you could have done to stop him. And I can't tell you how comforting that was. But the other thing she said, she would tell me over and over and over again. And she's just this, I don't want to say simple, but just an elegantly simple woman with such a pure heart and a good soul. She's a realtor, works too hard. She took me into her home. She'd stand at the foot of her bed every night and pray for me. Every night. She would take me to church with her and she'd ask the congregation to pray for me. But she did this for 4 months. Can you imagine letting the crazy woman into your house for 4 months to take care of her? But she would tell me, she said, I don't know. God has put this on my heart to take care of you, which is good because nobody else was showing up to do it. But she said, I don't understand this, but I know that sometime in the future, you're going to be standing in front of a lot of people and sharing your story, and it's going to bless millions. And I was like, girl, you on drugs. If
But she
I
wasn't.
survive this, but there were about 6 people who should have just said, "You're too crazy for me," and walked away, but they didn't. They literally surrounded me with love and in very practical ways, from feeding me. I started eating again when Tracy took care of me, and just said, "Oh, we're not going to lose you. No, that's not happening." But yeah, Tracy said, "I don't know how this happens, but I see you talking and sharing your story with millions, and it helps people." And one of the very early things I did shortly after this happened, I know we're low on time, but I had met this woman. Isn't it funny how these things work out? But I had met this woman whose young sister had ended her life in their home with a gun. So she was like, my friend was a young teen when this happened. Well, after my husband's thing, I said, I want her in my house. I have to talk to her. And she showed up, and she didn't say a word. She showed up at my house and she just put her arms around me. I mean, this was like hours after my husband's life ended. My friend put her arms around me and just hugged me, and we cried together. And if you don't know what to say to somebody, that's good. Sometimes we just need to show up and shut up. But crying with somebody is so powerful. We're just letting them scream. But anyway, she just cried with me and she whispered in my ear. I mean, she hugged me tight. She held on to me and she said, "Your life will never be the same." She said, "But there will be a day when you recover enough to be part of society again, and when you recover enough to help others." And I was like, whatever. But she told me this little phrase. She said after her sister's thing, she knew that she was at risk for suicide after her sister ended her own life. And she said she put this thing on her wall and it said, "Dear God, help me heal so I can help others heal." And my friend ended up being in a profession where that's what she does. She helps others heal now. And I wrote that, "Help me heal." It was a prayer, "Help me heal so I can help others heal." And man, I covered my house in that paper and I put Bible verses everywhere so I could know. Honestly, I was just telling somebody this the other day. It's so much easier to go insane. To pull yourself out of the pit of insanity is hard, hard, hard work. But that thing, "Help me heal so I can help others heal." So many times I would just collapse on the floor of my home and I would just say it through tears. And I'd say, "It looks like to me this is impossible, but I'm asking, help me heal so I can help others heal." So there was a time I got tired of the podcast and I stopped doing them for a while because, how many times can you tell the same story? But then I thought, no, that's not the gig. The gig is you asked, when you were coming apart, you asked God, "Help me heal so I can help others heal." So that's the deal.
Yeah, and I want to talk about prayer a little bit because you are a shining, living example of the power of prayer. And I know that prayer works. When my husband was in the hospital, I asked the staff, the nurses, what have you seen in the past that has helped someone in the same kind of situation? And there was nothing physical. I was thinking they were going to say some, like reading to him, which I did that anyway, or doing something, physical, massaging his feet, whatever it was. They said prayer. They said the only thing they've ever seen that's helped someone in a position like he was in was the power of prayer. Unfortunately, he didn't make it, but they've seen it. They've seen that the prayer works. So tell me about this power of prayer and how can we implement that into our life to help others?
Well, I think, and now, one of the emails I get most frequently from people, I get a lot of the same email. I mean, people ask the same questions. One is people are immensely comforted when I tell them that the angels say we know that life on this earth is hard. People say that broke the spell. I feel like I can, face the rest of my years now. If the angels get it, that life on this earth is hard, because one of these things about the law of what is it? Yeah, the law of God, what is it? The law of attraction. We're supposed to do all these affirmations all the time. I was really good at those affirmations about my husband living a long life. Never saw that one coming. So I think we need to appreciate that life on earth is hard. Sometimes it's harder for others. Sometimes we have seasons that are hard and seasons that maybe aren't so hard. But I was born and raised a Christian Scientist, so I grew up believing that you can pray for every circumstance and expect things to happen. And I remember I was 10 years old and I'd had bronchitis for 3 weeks. And boy, was I sick. And I mean, I was, still running around, but I had this cough and blah, blah. And my mother took me to a guy in the church whose whole thing was praying for people. And he said, "What do you want to do when you get home?" I said, "I want to go out and play." And he looked at my mother. He said, "Betty, can she go out and play?" And Betty said, "No." And he said, "Yeah, she's under God's care. She can go out and play." And that was the last time I coughed. It was the end of it. I that was the end of bronchitis. And I mean, it was 10 years old, but I remember thinking, this is I really believe in my heart of hearts that spiritual healing is the next frontier in the world of physical care. I really do. I mean, there's, I still have a lot of things in my life that need improvement, but I do believe I've heard so many stories about people who've been given up by the medical world. And then maybe that's what it takes is we have to be, okay, well, that's not an avenue of healing for me anymore. And I also think there's times when people just need to be allowed to go. I mean, I don't know the math. Oh my gosh, another question I got. Why did God save you and God didn't save my mother, my wife, my brother, my husband? Why did God save you? And I say, good question. Don't know the answer. And I don't do hypotheticals, but I know like the blind man that went to Jesus and got healed of being blind, and then he goes back to his little enclave, his community, and they say, "What did this man do? What magic is he using?" And the man says, "Hey, I don't know, but I know this: I was blind, and now I can see." And that's what I feel like when people say, "Why you? What's so special about you?" And I say, "Nothing. In fact, it seems to me if God's going to heal somebody, skip over the crazy neurotic writer, just kind of pass her on by." So I don't know the answer. I don't. But as to prayer, yes, I grew up believing that prayer is a powerful, powerful resource. And something I mentioned in my book, I've heard it said that staying prayed up is akin to practicing the violin and keeping it in tune, that it's not something we can just do occasionally. But this is a story, again, I mentioned it in my book, but I had a terrible fight with my first husband, and it was not a great marriage. And I got in my car, it was a rainy, miserable night. I was like 25 years old, if that, maybe even less. I'm out driving, and it's dark, and there's a heavy rain falling, and I can't, or it's a light rain, just driving, driving, driving. And I heard an angel voice. I was in a 1981 Honda Accord, and I heard this angel voice say, "Stop the car." I'm like, "What? It's a residential road. There's not a stoplight, stop sign for 300 yards." And it said, "Now." And I took my foot and I slammed on the brakes. And I'm like, "What was that about?" And I put the car in park and I exited the car, and there was a toddler right in front of my grill. This little boy had gotten out of his home and was in the street, and it was dark and it was foggy and misty and rainy, and I never saw him. But that kid was not 18 inches in front of my car. And had I not heard that voice, talk about messing somebody up, that would have been it for me. And not to mention the little boy. And the question is, was that my guardian angel or his guardian angel? Or maybe both. Maybe it was a collaborative effort. But yeah, there's so much more spiritually going on than we have a clue about. I mean, I go sit by my soybean field and I just beg, open my eyes, let me hear better, see better spiritually. Let me know the things of God, because I really think a big part of prayer is just tuning in and saying, okay, what direction should I go? How can I be a helper? What can I do today? Open my eyes. And I think also part of the gig is I don't think we're supposed to have them open all the time. I don't know why. They say we're here for spiritual growth. I hope. Because there's times life on this earth does get so hard, it breaks people. And those people who say God doesn't give us more than we can handle, no, that's not true. I've seen a lot of good people break. And again, I don't know the answer.
If my viewers wanted to reach out to you, you have a couple websites available, is that correct?
Yeah, my main website is temporarydeath.com. And I call it a temporary death experience because I wasn't near death. I was good and dead. But yeah, that's the best one. And there's a contact Rose button on it. That's the best way to reach me.
And if you had one message that you wanted the viewers to take away from this conversation that we've had together today, what would it be?
I think we really do need to learn how to love ourselves. I think the most spiritually sensitive people tend to be the hardest on themselves. And I think a lot of us are here to learn self love. That's what my buddy Ellen says, and it really resonated with me. I think learning how to love ourselves enables us to love others too. I just think that's a huge lesson. It's hard to be a sensitive soul in this world right now. It's just very hard. So I always told my children, what is it? Sensitive, intelligent, and creative. SIC. That is a tough combination. So just at times you get nothing you can do but put your head down, pray your best prayers, and plow through.
Rosemary, this has been amazing. I have a lot to think about. You offered some great advice, and I appreciate your time. It's been a blessing for me.
Thank you. I'm very glad to hear that.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.